Welcome to the Weird Library. I am the librarian. It is a pleasure to meet you here. Many have attempted, but failed to visit through various means where you have merely stumbled. Indeed, the stars must be right, and the mists have waned. Do not let the strangeness of these walls concern you, nor the vast collection of its tomes. I have selected a particular tale in anticipation of your arrival.
Engulfed by Chaz Mena. Read by Anthony Pearce. Engulfed. They missed their transfer at Barlicombe Station. Again. Always the same two men. It may have been in the sticks, just west past Basingstoke on the southern line from London. But at Barlicombe you could stretch your legs, post letters, or buy a bun and a brew for a threepence, while the train switched tracks. Then it was all aboard for Exeter, or Portsmouth bound, but not until next morning. Two lamplights, masked with black tinfoil, stood at both ends of the platform. Leftovers from the Blitz, no one bothered to take them down. The waiting room was spacious. It had half a dozen benches to lie on, but it too was locked. The low January sky over southern England shrouded a full moon, and the good people of Barlicombe, farmers mostly, slept under homespun woolen covers. Had they dreamt these men to life? One wore an olive-drab uniform to match his complexion. He stared down into the tracks. Maybe another dog face dropped a pack of gum through the gap, he thought, or a chocolate bar. Man alive for a Hershey's. But nothing. Waffenkulo. Short and squat, fingers thick as cucumbers. He could have sold you Moulin Yank from a corner pushcart in the Bowery, or South Philly. By then, the war's constant grind was replaced with a new purpose, one which may have wrapped it up. 4 months, whole battalions travelled up and down Britain, to and from training centres for exercises and war games. The other man on the platform wore khaki. He sat up against the station's wall, having a kip. 3 years in North Africa taught him to steal what sleep he could, anywhere and in any weather. His service-issued balaclava kept the weather out when flipped down over his face. It was well woven and kept him warm. Resigned to the cold concrete floor, arms to his side and unmoving, you'd think he had died of exposure if his moustache hadn't twitched now and again. By comparison, Olive Drab's service cap was a wet rag. GIs flattened and peaked theirs, all hepcat cool, yeah. But in bad weather, and it sleeted most every night this winter, they were sponges. His army-issued trench coat was warm enough, reaching down below the knee. Finely woven and pleated in the back like a medieval smock. With thick pliable wool and an ample collar that cocked past the ears, the army had finally got something right. But the service caps gave everybody a cold. By comparison, Khaki's rough-hewn greatcoat was thinner and turned as stiff as cardboard in the cold. Its sharp-stitched collar cut into the nape of his neck as he came in and out of sleep. Splat went the Yank's cap against his knee for the umpteenth time. Khaki would ignore it no longer. "Get up and bar the door," murmured the Englishman. "Come again?" said the Yank. "No, mate, thinking out loud. Get up and bar the door? The fable, know it?" "Nope." "Old couple in bed on a frosty night. fighting over who will get up to bar the door.
Yeah?
Get up and bar the door, husband, says his wife. Nay, I've ploughed all day. You left it open, mother, you will, says he. But I did the washing all day. You do, no, you.
I got it. Go on.
A far-off drone was heard, still far enough to ignore. Then a thief snuck in, which made no difference to the geezers yelling at each other. Cutting noses off to spite their faces, we'd say. Despite the thief, who pinches him for all they're worth. The sound of engines, louder, closing in. Why? Said the American. Sorry? Said the Englishman. Why didn't they nab the guy? What guy? Repeated the Englishman, now irritated. The thief, man, the burglar. You're missing the point, mate, said the Englishman, about to give up. By the time they looked up, a squadron of heavies, too low for comfort, roared past above their heads. Both ran in circles for cover. The Yank hit the deck, cupped his ears, and opened his mouth as he was trained to do. The Brit flattened himself against the station's limestone wall to become one with it. No way Jerry could have amassed those many bombers so deep into Britain by then in the war, so they knew they were allied, but reflexes kept you alive on the front. You're about to land, I reckon, said the Englishman, half to himself. Neither moved until the engines faded away, leaving only dozens of frozen contrails above. Back from a raid, over God knows where, said the Englishman, beagled off the station wall. Softening up Jerry for us, said the Yank nonchalantly to save face. Aye, Yank, aye, said the other, who did the same. An iron balloon flew over both men. My boy's got steak and ice cream waiting for him at the mess, said the American, appealing to same envy he thought the Limey had for airmen. Not if they're British, they don't, said the Tommy, resentful. But thanks, a chocolate biscuit, and good night, more likely.
How do you know they're RAF? Oh, right, the GI caught himself, who remembered the British bombed at night.
And we don't serve steak and ice cream, mate. Sorry, said the American, sobered.
Nothing moved, not the slightest midnight breeze.
The clouds were gessoed to the sky. The still landscape seemed newly rendered, glistening. Both stood side by side and took it all in, their feet glued to the platform like foreground subjects in the same painting, their backs to us. Mind my asking you something, said the Yank without warning. We've all the time in the world, chum. What gives? The place is deserted. Any podunk town back home keeps at least one flunky man in the station. The fuck?
There it was. Another foul-mouthed malcontent Yank, thought the Englishman. Britain is small, backward, and snooty.
Well, then suck it up, mate. Wait for the next train, same as me, said the Englishman to himself.
Well, most railway staff is serving, Yank. Now do you mind if I ask you something?
The Yank nodded. What good is an attendant if a station's closed? He'd let us in, out of the shitty weather for one thing, said the Yank, not knowing when to stop. There's got to be someone inside, but he's probably snoozing on the job, just like you were. Khaki could have throttled him on the spot. I doubt that, son. Was he calling son? Thought the Yank, but let it go. I mean, at least post a sign-up if service is down.
The Englishman snapped back.
Railway hours are printed on your ticket, mate. You missed your train, like I did. How could they have done so? Both pondered. How were they separated from their men? The Yank undid the bottom of his overcoat and searched and patted over his pants and shirt pockets. No ticket. Then he put his hand into the coat pocket and took out a crumpled newspaper clipping, which he quickly shoved back in. He took out his hand to shake. "Will," said the American in the spirit of comradeship. "Distract, diffuse, de-escalate," went the American Army's maxim when pissing off a Briton. Will do what? Said the Brit, playing dumb. The name. My name is Will. Ah, Les said, bemused. Why not Willie, as in the Jeep? Stay cool, thought Will. Not quite, said Will, with his hand still left hanging. Then why not Bill? That's short for William. Never heard of Will Rogers? Joked Will. Listen, Tommy, I didn't mean anything earlier. Just belly aching. It's Les. Okay, Lester, like I was saying, see? I didn't mean Les. It's short for Leslie, mate. Will backed away a few steps. Not uncommon in Yorkshire, mate, said Les, long immune to the abuse. It was his grandfather's name. Legend in the same regiment and decorated for his gallantry. His father, whoever he was, may have been a reprobate piece of shite, but he'd be damned before he'd let this Yank ride Grandpa, Les decided. The same voice Les carried with him everywhere, in anything, in sandstorms or glued to Italian mud in a rainstorm, whether shelled or strafed. Grandad was with him. If it comes to it, Les, hammer the forehead into the Yank's gut. It won't, Grandad. He's gutless. He who strikes first strikes twice, son. Well, I'm from the city, New York. That's what we call it in America, the city. Unless you're from Chicago, then that's the city. Or, he added drolly, or if you're from out west, then, yeah, I guess San Francisco would be the city. A right hooligan, that one. Don't turn your back on him, lad. Lance Corporal Leslie Richards, East Yorkshire Yeomanry, said Les, left with no other option than to shake. Bound to be a long night. Sergeant William Bianchi, 1st U.S. Division. They kept shaking and shaking. And yet some more. More. Longer still. Ding ding. Round 1. Leslie, said Will. Can't say I came across a name like that back home. Here, Yank, give us a fag, said Les to change the subject. A butt, you call him, I think. He didn't object to being given the mickey every now and then, as mates do. It's to be expected. But from a bloody Yank git? Will took his wet cap off and slapped it on the palm of his hand, which he knew irritated the guy. You're killing me, Mac. Here, have at, Will said, as he fished for the crushed pack of Lucky Strikes in his coat pocket. He tossed it to Les, who caught it like a good sport, pried out a cigarette, and pocketed the rest. It stopped sleeting. The gusts of wind over the channel blew north and reached Barleycomb's icy meadows. It made for a mist which soon thickened into a fog that soon rose and curled onto the platform, engulfing both men. Hey, Les, you still among the living? Yes, Bill, sighed Les. Will, and, that pack of cigs in your pocket, it ain't Lend-Lease. Oh, wasn't a gift. Sorry, mate, said Les, as if hurt, playing off the American obsession to seem generous and belittle everyone else. Holy smoke, some weather you got here, said Will, ignoring Les. Perhaps a pardon, if he knew better. Don't know how you all can stand it. If it ain't hail, then it's sleet, or freezing rain. And now this goddamn mist, said Will, almost berating. Les clucked his tongue with bare-faced disgust, but it didn't register. Will went on to compare New York's weather to London's, how Manhattan fog never dared creep up past 14th Street or Summit. How wearisome. That should be a collective noun for Americans, he mused. A babble of Yanks. Nah, that's redundant. Clucking of Yanks? Nah, not fair to chickens. Blimey, when was the last time he had chicken? They're more like parrots, Yanks, aren't they? All green and squawking about. A squawking of Yanks, that's it. What do you say, Grandad? No, lad. A pandemonium of parrots. Really? Aye. We saw hundreds in the veldt, didn't we? We lay face up, every man jack, and watched them circle above. Big ones too they were, not like the ones in cages back home. Green with reds and yellows with long tails, boy. What a bonny sight. Pandemonium of parrots, pronounced good Colonel Roberts.
and followed them with his finger astride his cob horse.
It's a real pea super, sure, said Les. Sorry, Yank, I took your last fag.
Yeah, said Will dismissively.
No big deal. We got warehouses full back at the base. Cartons and cartons for every swinging pair. I no doubt, Les said, green with envy, wondering how much more he could take from this man. Visibility is now 0, said Will. He heard a match strike. When he looked in Les's direction, he saw 2 points of light pierce the fog. There you are, mate, said Les, as he reached across the soup to offer Will half a cigarette. I don't know where your mouth's been, Limey, Will said, but thanks anyway. Half of my own cigarette, doesn't that beat all? He'll tell the guys when it base. What a cheeky bastard from the land of milk and honey and whiskey, bugger. Born ingrates, these Americans. The higher the rank, the more ingracious, too. They spread wide in train compartments, stand in the aisles, unmindful of others squeezing by to get off at their stations. Corn-fed gits. Big cheeses who bribe their way to the best tables and cafes arm in arm with lady friends. Our ladies. And here was one of the darker specimens, the filthy ape. Our stations, our trains, under our weather, for better or worse. Why must we be silent while these thieves break into our homes like the geezers in the story? Pondered Les some more. Because we owe them, say our all too placent amongst us. Owe them what? Not me, Squire. They're in this shit, same as we. Shouldn't our saviours, as they fancy themselves, mind their tongue and earn their keep in my house? So why not have a bit of fun until the train arrives, Grandad? It may be hours still before the train arrives. Nothing to do but sit around and wait. After all, Grandad, you never suffered idleness.
Oh, aye, never. For it teaches much evil, eh, son? Ecclesiastes 33:27.
Sicily, scoffed Les, loud enough for Will to hear him across meters of fog. He spat on the floor in his direction, too, hoping it landed on the Yank. What's that, man? Sicily, man. You ask where my mouth's been, and before there, the desert. Oh, me too, said Will, holding his own. The fuck did he want, a medal? I seen plenty of shit too, you. But he kept his tongue. It's going to be a long night, and the dickhead could come in handy if any hillbillies, or whatever they called round here, decided to jump them. Everyone knew GIs were loaded. Bianchi, that's I-tie, innit? Said Les, prodding. You betcha. So, William, or do you prefer, was it Guglielmo? Queried Les, all malice. Will is fine, I fucking said. That's funny. We bivouacked in a town called Bianchi. Well, not much of a town, really. More like a row of shithouses by a lagoon. Fontana Bianchi. Yeah, I know it. Will pronounced the name of the port town in perfect Italian, and decided to wait and see where this was going. We flattened it. May have done them a favour, Les said. Well, I'm sure you had to, bud. Oh, mate, feigning regret. That's where the old familiar surfaced, innit? Sorry, Bill, Les said innocently. Last time I'll say it, friend. It's Will, and we're from New York. Oh, aye. Anyhow, after we took Messina, they sent us to Bianchi for a rest. Blimey, what a time that was. Sunshine, vino, and lasses. Signorinas, as your lot calls them. All ages. All keen too. White fountains. That's what Fontana Bianchi means in Italian. Oh, we didn't care. Weren't there for art-eye lessons, mate, Les said, begging for it. It's the best you can do, buddy, Will would have said aloud, as if he didn't get a lot worse off Atlantic Avenue back in Brooklyn, wise guys trashing their mothers and sisters. Hey, Genny, ain't it true Wop girls got gala coming out of the cunt? He's heard it all, but friendly they were, your signorinas. Obliging. Well, they had to be, of course, said Les, cutting in on Will's memory.
I wonder if you've gone too far, son.
It's all right, Grandpa. Just a wee dust-up, till the train comes. I bet, said Will to Les, biding his time. He is close enough to jab an eye and then pounce, but hurting any one of our hosts in a fight, soldier or not, Will reflected, they'd send me back. No ifs, ands, or buts, with a couple months in the stockade thrown in. More importantly, Will, you wop,
he told himself. Who's going to look after my jokers? Sent back right after deploying to France, Norway, Timbuktu, or whatever the fuck we're going? 40% of getting it, like the colonel said. On the first day alone. Dead men walking, practically. Nah, screw this guy, he reasoned. Oh, yes, Yank. Go on, mate, or maybe you're shy, he thought. Will could see it in the limey's face, too, so why not toss the ball back? Gently. After all, wasn't this the way these guys made nice? Like the colonel said, the British tease their friends unmercifully. Yes, sir, Colonel. You know what, Mac? Will paused for effect. It's the same here. Real friendly. Desperate even. Married, widowed, it don't matter. Ever go to Hyde Park after 2200? Oh, brother. They come up, show how much with their fingers. You nod, then it skirts up and touch your toes, doll. It'll blow you for a can of Spam. They locked eyes, and as if by agreement, stomped on each other's foot with all their pent-up might. Fuck! Both men screamed in unison, in harmony, like Hope and Crosby, and peeled away to opposite ends of the platform, hopping on their good foot. You Yank shite, limey son of a bitch, and nursed their bludgeoned toes under what little light the station provided. After a bit, they limped toward each other in the fog, like two gunslingers in a Kansas dust storm. Two blind men fighting by braille. They poked and prodded for weak points, lunged and evaded. Will held on to Les and scored some hits, but lost his grip a moment later. Les closed in and caused some damage, only for the tables to turn again. They were matched perfectly. Like met like. Keep still so I can hit you, said Will. Beat. Get stuffed. Les. Winded. Both were spent, pushing one another for some respite. The fog lifted as both men ran out of steam, like a curtain raised for the second act. They stepped back a ways and took each other in. Worse for wear, but neither whooped. They wiped the sweat off their palms on the seats of their pants. A breath later, they both lunged and fell upon each other in a last-ditch effort. Out of nowhere, Will got Les in a half-Nelson and pinned him down under his full weight. A desperate Les reached under him and felt for Will's testicles and squeezed like he was shucking peas back home. They squirmed their way to only a few feet from the platform's edge. There was a 7-foot drop to the railings below. Les's face acted like a brake, squished on the floor like a bug under Will, whose mouth opened in anguish, 1,000 gnomes kicking him in the abdomen with every heartbeat. I'd wagered a Yankee would come to an arrangement, son. Can't breathe, bugger. Language, boy. Put away your crooked speech and keep devious talk far from you. Proverbs 4:24. His granddad's whisper never failed. Les relaxed his grip, and in exchange Will loosened his hold. After a few seconds of give and take, they arrived at something like a truce, but they still clung to each other, just in case. Les remembered the desert nomads who scavenged after every battle. Why not? We were the barbarians, fighting for sand, inert and unforgiving. What do the Bedouins care about incendiary bombs, concentration camps, or plunks? So they stole from our dead and wounded, right? And so what? Wouldn't we all be killed before this war was over, in one way or another? As for Will, he remembered when one man from another company, didn't know the guy, didn't get out of the way of the column of Shermans on the way to Messina. Sheafed flat, the guy was. Airmail thin. You could ride home on him. We just stepped over him. Sure, tank crew saw him, but they didn't stop. No stopping was the order of the day. Just a fucking timetable to keep up. Like with trains, he mused. That was enough. Will and Les let go of each other, and they fell into the tracks. He opened his eyes to the midday sun on his face, cheeks sizzling. Coney Island? Did I make it? No. He remembered it was night-time when he fell, hard. Had he lay there all night, past morning? The surf frothed over him and wiped away all doubt. He swallowed water. It pulled back,
When he lifted his head to spit some out, a portion of steel treads came into view. A bigger wave came, and he lifted his head higher. It was a troop carrier, a duck, knocked out, wheels up, and billowing smoke. Blinded by a flash followed by the loudest mortar round he'd ever witnessed, he bolted for shore. Wait, he couldn't have been. He was conscious. Kinda. Something plopped beside him in clumps, like spilled hash. When the waves withdrew, he was lousy with it. A dead octopus, a bit of seaweed? He couldn't free himself from it, or he'd blow his cover. He let himself float on his back instead, and played dead. Above him, the Navy's 16-inch shells tore through the air, big as boxcars. They landed on the beach like angry giants, stomping on the enemy. Now came my sprint to shore. But what was the shit holding him back? Some of it got inside his mouth. Oily and splintery. Tackle? It got stuck in his teeth and tickled the back of his throat like fish bones? No, hair. Now he knew. Forget it. Meat, bone, mother of God, spit it out! The shelling stopped. His cue could wait no longer. Like how Karloff leapt off a gurney in Frankenstein, Will did off the sandbar. The water shot up to his chest when he landed, which slowed him down, but he had some time before the enemy gunners came out of their dugouts. He worked his legs, skimming when it got deep, because Brooklyn don't swim, he bellowed. Reaching the shore as the shelling died down, and something sparkled in the damp sand ahead. He scooped it up without breaking his stride. Small arms peppered away. In a few minutes the MGs would open up. Such little time and a whole beach to cover. Cover, find some, dunes. Keep moving or get greased. He had no weapon but a handful of wet sand. Kicking up sand behind him like a belt sander, which he knew made him an easy target. Sport. Make the seawall and you're safe, said the colonel. Dry sand to live, wet sand to die, is how Will made his squad remember it. Get going, Bianchi. He did. Oh God, the son of a bitch, sweat in my eyes. Keep moving. Dune, at 2 o'clock, go for it like mama's breast. He twirled in the air, head first, and landed with his back to the last dune before the sea wall. I can't fucking move, he may have said aloud, as if he could hear himself over the firing. Time to exhale. He'd forgot to breathe since hitting the beach. He remembered the metal piece he'd picked up at the shoreline. He opened his hand and saw it was a dog tag. He spat on it with what little saliva he could collect in his mouth, kept rubbing it until the firing stopped of a sudden, like a light switch. He found the right angle in the blinding sun to make out the name on the tag. He read his own. It's so quiet it could be nighttime, but it ain't. If I bought it? Fuck it, he said when he got up and walked back to shore, his back to the enemy. He figured, if he was dead, what's the harm? Up and down the whole expanse of the shoreline, there was no one. No kit his men may have dropped wading in, abandoned at landing. Niente. The tide ebbed. He looked out to sea, but his sandbar was gone. So was the duck carrier he came in on, the one that landed belly up after a direct hit. He turned back and walked to the seawall this time. Where are my guys? Said Will, when land breeze blew out to sea and stung his throat. It tasted like coal dust and stuck to the roof of his mouth. He coughed, and dropped to his knees, and kept his eyes closed until it stopped. When he opened them, it was dark, it was cold. He knelt on the unforgiving gravel between the two rails. He looked up and found Les, hands on his waist, peering down on him. He was missing a boot. You all right then, Yank? Said Les, concerned, which may have surprised Will if he weren't half dazed. Out of the night came a third voice.
Are you in need of some assistance, gentlemen?
Will and Les started, and were blinded by a torch aimed right at their faces. Will rose and hoisted himself onto the platform. He remembered Les and turned to help him up, but there stood Lance Corporal Leslie murmuring, Guess we both had it coming, mate. The flashlight beam ran down the length of their bodies and stopped at their feet. This is when Will remembered the fight, though he couldn't remember how it started. I mean, Les was just another dog face, a Tommy, whatever they call it, and a nom-com too, same as he was. That explains these, said the voice who threw out them a pair of mismatched boots with their caps inside. Once shod, the torchlight went dark on both the men. It was colder now. The weather had cleared, crisp and dry, with the smell of wet sawdust that lingers on the campfire as morning approaches. The clouds were gone, and with it the foul weather. A full moon lit the length and breadth of the platform, spilling its grey light over the hoary meadow and beyond. And so began the night's third act. No one spoke. Before Les and Will stood a man in his 60s, perhaps older. He was pear-shaped, but stalwart enough in his railway's Prussian blue uniform. His képi sat firmly on his head, cocked sideways, a la gendarmerie. An old soldier, judging the way he shouldered his satchel, and kept his torch pointed to Will and Les, like a rifle.
Know what a Mexican standoff is, old-timer?
Said Will, breaking the spell.
Can't say I do, Yank, said the railway man, no pushover. When 3 gunfighters face off, then shoot at the one who draws first, usually, said Les, in a none-too-shabby Texan accent. Will nodded in approval. Well, you'll get no call from me, partner. Funny how you fell in tonight. That's a first. A first? Said Will, not sure he'd heard right. The railway man didn't clarify. Always the coldest right before morning, they say, he said instead. And all things touch bottom before they rise, or nothing new is made. Not now, Grandad. How long before the next train? Les said. Will cut in, pointed to the big red patch on his shoulder and announced, Hey, Chief, I'm Sergeant First Class William Bianchi, 1st U.S. Infantry. Impressive, said the railway man, unimpressed. Kind is, yeah. Now we have to get to base, stat, see? But I know you do, Sergeant, as does Lance Corporal here, he said, perhaps adding unwisely, we've known that forever. Les and Will, at sea. Lance Corporal Leslie Richards, said Les, and offered his hand. He may be daft, but he's all they have, for now. This is Sergeant Bianchi of New York. Brooklyn! And I must return to camp right away, continued Les. But it stands to reason, gentlemen, said the railway man. I gotta get to base near Uford Station, man, the desperate Will cut in. Quiet, Sergeant, loose lips and all that, said Les in mock censure. We'll have you back tickety-boo, or I'm not Station Master Marshal Paxton, he said affably. At your service. Nice to meet you, Marshal. You may call me Paxton, Sergeant Bianchi. Les howled. Let's tell him, Station Master. These Americans and their democratic ways. He winked at Will. Gentlemen, I've inspected the track lines all night between here and next station, said Paxton. The time for pleasantries was past. I'm knackered. Come inside, get warm, and we'll send you on your ways. He tugged on a chain tied to his waistcoat, felt for the short-shanked brass key to his office, and walked away. The men followed. In no time they came to the station's indicator board. You bolted to the platform railing. Paxton's hut was down just a few paces. Will and Les gave more than a passing glance at the notices. What's this then? Said Les, and read aloud. Somerset County notice hereby giving Southern Railway Barnacombe Station closed for maintenance. 19 January to 20 February. 20... Les turned to Will, who was distracted by another notice. He, too, read aloud. Bicycle for sale, hardly used, practically new, and ready to ride home on. Will, tell me the date. It's, I can't. But let's get a load of this. Ready to ride home on for £100. He whistled. 100 quid? Is it made out of gold or what? Les yelled for Paxton, wanting answers, but caught him unlocking the door in a hurry to enter his office. Oi, Paxton, what's today's date? They lost track of time. Talking, smoking, a score of cigarette butts at their feet. Paxton sat across from Will and Les, lounging behind a morbidly unkempt desk with a topsoil of paperwork 3 inches deep. Here was a man, way behind, who made no effort to hide it. Couldn't care less. To Les, it was an abomination, a shocking example of civvy indolence. Will, a third of whose time was paper-pushing, could hear his colonel declare in his tinny Alabaman, "This laxity towards duty, gentlemen, is how wars are lost." I served in the Gulf, Paxton said.
Les bent over to put out his fag on the heel of his boot. He stopped for a moment and asked, "Where? What you mean, the—" "Sorry, Iraq," Paxton hastened to say then. "The Near East," as correcting himself. "Territorials?" asked Les, still not satisfied. "No, cavalry." That was curt, thought Les. What's he hiding? "Easy, son. Let the gentleman finish," whispered Grandad in his ear. "My colonel's cavalry, from Alabama," said Will, his attempt to dispel a mounting awkwardness. "Oh, a Confederate," quipped Paxton. "Could have been, the old fart," said Will. All three laughed, perhaps a bit too forced, and Paxton was indebted to the American for helping keep Les off his scent. But then he caught Will and Les stealing a glance at each other. Paxton could sense their tails were up. Perhaps they feared he'd hand them over to the military police for absence without leave, AWOL, as the Yanks called it. "Did your father serve, Les?" asked Paxton, juggling a fifth pin to win back their trust. "Granddad had. Second Boer War. Don't know where or if my father served. Might have done. Just can't say, really," said Les, tripped up. "I'd like to tell you more, if I knew, but And he tapered off. He stared at his hands in his lap, resignedly, a well-practiced gesture relied upon to quiet a room whenever his legitimacy came up. Then Les made a discovery. "All these bloody liver spots on my hands," he cried out. "Bleeding schools of them." "Chief, how about them rides to base?" Will may have said for the 50th time. The American's nose was more pronounced in the time he had spent in Paxton's office, bulbous, with purple veins coursing over it. Paxton was sure Will's face had grown much thinner, gaunt, and unshaven. The charred tea kettle behind the desk whistled dyspeptically. It danced upon the ancient kerosene stove, dented and dimpled as it was, beat thin like the two men in his office. Paxton stood. He pulled out a rag from his back pocket and lifted the kettle from the fire. He turned back to his desk, where the 3 willing mugs stood at attention. "When did we lose your men, Will?" said Paxton with unwarranted knowledge. "I beg your pardon?" "Your company, on the beach. Geller, wasn't it? In Sicily?" "We don't remember having spoken about them, Mr. Paxton." "Kept saying you had, mate, when you fell on the rails tonight," said Les. "Paxton here must have overheard you." "Yeah? Well, I don't know. Maybe," said Will before the Brooklyn rose in him. He lifted his arm, pointed at Paxton, and with all the stops pulled, demanded, "Chief, are they fucking coming for us or not?" "We really must be on our way, Station Master," said Les, and lowered the American's arm. "Why don't we ring dispatch again? There's a good fella," and he gestured to the crank telephone on the wall. Paxton looked straight at Will. Will looked back. He would have feigned calling, as he had before, standing before the antique phone, his back to the pair, but it was time to end it. He fished his smartphone out from underneath the layers of receipts, reports, requisitions, etc., his desk, and fast-dialed a number. A long ding sounded, and Les thought it was the kettle going off again. "Dispatch? Right. They're still here, in my office. Missed their connection, yeah. I'm all right. Besides, it'll be daylight soon. But it's—" Paxton had a look at the men, markedly older somehow. "Something's gone off, and I'd like to address it, if that's all right." "Righto." Paxton replaced the kettle. Will and Les sat frozen, open-mouthed to where a nation of flies could have swarmed inside. They were aging, Paxton decided. Both looked well into their late 50s. Les's bushy moustache had turned grey, for instance. This was all new. It's never happened like this, Paxton reflected, somewhat less coolly. He wasn't an easy man to spook. That's why they assigned him to this post in the first place, and the balance of unease still lay this side of curiosity. But it was a singular occasion in his long tenure as station master at Barbican. "Show and tell, Dick Tracy," said Will, lunging over the desk for Paxton Mobile, who quickly pocketed it. "State secret, gentlemen. No can do. Finish your tea. You've not had any." Paxton reached down underneath his desk for a tin of biscuits. He opened it and offered some. "Just a few more minutes, and you'll be back where you belong." "What you mean state secret?" said Les, whose once ruddy sideburns were now ashen. "Who are you?" said Will, who rose and kicked his chair back with such force it smacked against the office door. Les only sighed resignedly. It was as if he'd known Will for an eternity. Paxton didn't stir. His brow furled, eyes glossed over, rapt by the spectacle playing out before him. Will rifled through its pockets as if to find a weapon. A stiletto knife, supposed Paxton, holding back a laugh at Will, who fumbled in and out of the many pockets on his uniform. The Yank's signature nose arced to such an extreme, it changed his once proud Roman profile into a crescent moon. Like a commedia mask, his ears were larger by half, out of which grey and black curlicues sprung out like wires. "Sit down, Dottore," said Paxton, and gestured to the chair. The sleeves of his jacket traced in bright fuchsia by the light filtering through the chinks in Paxton's office. "Don't you speak Dago to me, Chief," Will said, as bald as a baby now, and sounding like a pensioner wanting his pudding. His lips were almost erased, and his cheeks collapsed into a toothless scowl. The elder Yank made vague, pugilistic gestures with his spindly arms. Meanwhile, crow's feet deepened and travelled up to the facsimile of a hairline on 82-year-old Lance Corporal Leslie Richards of the East Yorkshire Yeomanry. 2 faults ran north and south along his taut, paper-thin cheeks. Les decided it was time for some air, but he rose too hastily and lost his balance, tripping on the leg of his chair. He landed, face first, on Paxton's concrete floor. He clutched his left side below the waist and screamed like a gutted hart. Paxton was out from behind his desk in a flash. He intended to lift the now skeletal Les from the floor, but he thought better. What if he busted his hip? There were loose strands of red hair where Les had fallen. Grandad laid on the floor beside him, face to face. "Grandad, what's happening to me?" "The shatter your hip, son." "But how old am I? I was young only a minute ago." "Bugger Les, that's what we all say." Will found what he searched for in his trench coat. It wasn't a knife or Acme brass knuckles. He pulled out the newspaper clipping he carried with him for years, all torn and yellowed with age. When it dawned over Barleycombe and South Somerset Green, Paxton switched the light off on his desk and raised the blinds. Morning light spilled in and pointed to the floor in a solid, if angled, column. Will stared at the crumpled paper in his hand. Paxton walked over to him. "May I see that for a moment, mates?" Will obliged and handed over the clipping. Then he saw Les prostrated on the floor. Something kick-started him, and he ran to Les's side. "Can you move, buddy?" "Not at the moment," Les answered with a laugh. Suddenly, a digital alarm honked in sync to 5 a.m. flashing on and off. "Sorry, that's my shift ending officially," said Paxton, who went over and slapped it off with a well-practiced gesture. Will took off his tattered GI coat and covered Les with it. "Les, I'm going to turn you around," and he bent his knees as far as his age allowed into a crouching position by Les and cradled him from behind. Using what little mass he had, rolled sideways to pull Les up into a sitting position on the floor. "What now, station master?" Will asked, as helpless as a child. "They're coming for us." Paxton dragged his feet to the window for enough light to read the newspaper clipping for the 700th time. No lie. "Is it an incantation to make us young again?" Les snickered, which made red bubbles at the sides of his lipless mouth. "Read it aloud again, Chief," said Will, just above a whisper. Paxton recited, almost by memory. London, AP News. At 19:20 hours, 16 January 1944, a dense fog and muted wartime conditions resulted in tragedy at Barleycombe Station, Somerset. The Southern Line's train from Waterloo Station stopped at the same, en route to points south. Due to poor visibility, the driver had not seen several caution signals and stopped 110 yards past a danger signal. Meanwhile, the Exeter-bound express was given a line clear. In no time, it ran into the rear of the Southern line at 50 to 60 miles per hour. Both trains were at full capacity. There were 43 fatalities. Most were soldiers of the East Yorkshire Regiment and US 1st Division. Why many servicemen were killed was due to standing in the aisles, after their habit of offering seats to women, children, and the elderly. Paxton opened the door to his office. Another stream of sunlight penetrated into the hut, like the shaft of a spear, charging the dust which rose and fell within it. "We're busting out of here, Les," said the American. "Lean on me." Will pulled Les's arm taut over his shoulders. Together they pressed and lifted each other up. "Hang on, Will. Take your coat off me. Keep it, Les. Here's your cap." "Wear it. You're still wet." They took their time. Paxton knew better than to offer his help as they limped past him. He stood by the door as if on guard instead. It was his way of saying they were always welcome to return. But it had never played out this way before, he kept telling himself. This may be it, he reckoned. Will and Les made their way onto the platform in broad daylight for the first time since the war ended. On cue, a train pulled into the station, even before the brakes stopped shrieking and its spout let out the last head of steam. The car doors slid open. Out poured young men and women in khaki and olive green. The elderly stayed behind and waved handkerchiefs from the train car windows. Will and Les were halfway down the platform when their boys, with open arms, engulfed them.
It has been wonderful having you visit, but time is fleeting. The universe has begun to shift away from our convergence, for now. Chaz Mena divides his time between New York City and Coral Gables, Florida, with his heroes, wife Ileana Musa and their daughter Annabella. He is an award-winning writer, producer, and actor featured in scores of independent films, major Hollywood studio features, and television serials. Just last month, in October of 2024, his feature film, Bella, which he co-wrote and co-produced with Vanguardia Films, premiered at the New York Latino Film Festival. Earlier in 2024, his most recent screenplay, Ascender, was optioned and goes into pre-production in 2025. His one-person play, Yo Solo, Bernardo de Galvez in the American Revolution, was televised nationally on PBS and garnered Chaz U.S. congressional recognition for promoting American history. You can read more about him at chazmena.com, CHAZMENA.com. Did you know that you can get your very own Weird Library logo book bag? Check out all of our merch at www.weirdlibrary.com. All proceeds go towards producing episodes for the Weird Library. Other ways to help the podcast are to follow, rate, and review the Weird Library on your favorite streaming service. This really helps the show reach more people who will enjoy our stories. Your support is much appreciated, and thank you for listening.